Because script writing is such a vast topic all by itself, it would not only be impossible to cover it here, but I am also in no way equipped to even assume that I could. There are many people who are far more knowledgeable than me out there, as well as volumes of books written specifically about the topic with a lot more insight that offers many approaches to writing film scripts. This includes, but it's certainly not limited to, structure, breakdowns, ideas, deeper dives into character development and character arcs, foreshadowing, subplots, the interconnectedness of scenes, pacing, the use of metaphors, the notion of writing for specific film genres to perhaps connect with audiences more easily, and dare I say it, any rules to follow. What I can share though, which also does touch on some of those things I guess, is my own approach to writing a no-budget feature film, which may help if you're attempting a similar thing. Usually I find I write much better when I first wake up in the mornings, otherwise by the time the evening rolls around, my head is just filled with the day's events and I just don't seem to concentrate just as much on what I want to write, or I'm just too tired from work that day, especially when I was working on construction sites while I was getting the film made. I couldn't simply lounge around in a hammock on a beach somewhere and write all day until the script was completed. I had bills to pay, so I had to work as well. So I would set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. every day. I'd wake up and write for at least 1 hour, sometimes a bit longer, before getting ready and heading to work on a construction site for the day. That way I figured I was writing for a good solid 5 constructive hours at minimum during the week, and then I would spend all weekend continuing to write. The premise of the story for Electrician was already kind of there from the short I had written and experimented with back in 2010, but now I had to massively expand upon that and figure out what had worked in the short and removing from it what I felt was no longer relevant for the feature. I knew that I would also be shooting the film myself, so the script also doubled up as a shot list as well, and I made notes next to each scene and bit of dialogue of how I would like to ideally shoot them, which was difficult to foresee most of the time as a lot of the locations we would shoot at hadn't actually been sourced yet, sometimes not until the actual day of shooting them. I also made additional editing notes on the script to remember later on as well when it was time for me to edit the film. I had written a lot of short format scripts and concepts for quite a few years by this point, but this was now my first time sitting down and attempting to write a full-on feature film script. As with this entire project, it would be fair to say that my naivety, in both a good and bad way, carried me through each stage of production, including the writing stage. I simply didn't know any different from how I was about to write the script. I had no previous experience, no preconceived notions, and no personal reference point to compare my work against. It was all a kind of exciting balancing act, wondering if it would serve me well or not. Having never written anything of this extent before, never having to write for anyone else before, never having anyone telling me what I had to write, never having to get sign off from multiple people or production companies, never having to worry about ticking boxes or meeting stipulations or factor in funding requirements or having to follow trends or riding waves or considering commercial success or having to line up a sequel or trilogy or please a massive audience, and having no other restraints at all really, apart from the obvious fact that there was no budget, of course, I found to be freeing. That said, I never knew any different, and none of those considerations even crossed my mind when I started to write the film. Now, this isn't to say that taking some or all of those things into account is bad or they can't benefit a project in some ways. At some point, they are worth considering, and that's something that become more apparent to me later. No doubt being able to factor some or all of those things in is necessary, particularly for discussions about funding or distribution, as some or all of these factors do come into play then. I had also read a lot over the years about script writing, listened to experienced writers discuss their process and research this specific aspect of filmmaking to some degree. However, I had never formally studied script writing, not at film school or in writing classes or workshops or writers groups or anything like that. As someone who has studied movies my entire life by watching them religiously, engaging what works and what doesn't work, it would be fair to say this was my biggest asset, and I relied heavily on it when developing my own scripts. That, along with the short films I had previously written, my imagination, any natural writing flair, ideas, visuals, opinions, and years of trial and error with other film work. This all formed the foundation of my approach. I was also very much writing from the heart, I guess, on pure instinct, and I suppose you could say largely from an artistic point of view. I knew I couldn't just write anything that I wanted. I also had to find common ground without a budget. Electrician was the best and most practical idea to use as a vehicle for making a feature film with no budget for lots of reasons I've already mentioned previously. One key factor being able to easily tap into the world of construction and build a film around it. The very specific reasons that led me to believe I could now make a no-budget feature film also very much dictated how I wrote it, with what could and could not be achieved. And so those same reasons also very much dictated the storyline of the film as well, and that trade-off is just how it had to be, and I accepted that. While writing a script, I knew that I was going to have to put as much creative effort, brain power, imagination, and ingenuity into how this film was going to get made on a practical level as I was with any kind of plot. And I was constantly having those things run parallel together in my mind while writing, as a bit of a battle that I had to referee. I was also writing with myself in mind as the audience, and I was being very critical as to whether I would watch this film back when I read it back to myself. Because if I'm not interested in watching this film, then how am I going to do a job of making it in a convincing way to get others to sit through it? So there was already a lot to bear in mind even before I sat down to start writing a script. Sometimes when writing, I very much like to know how the story ends from the off. It doesn't have to be concrete, just a rough idea. That way I know where I am heading towards, even if the ending changes later. I just find it easier to steer towards something at times, and I always had the ending of Electrician in my mind very early on. Whilst I didn't aim to be overly clever with the film's general plot, I was keen to have an ending that left viewers with something to think about, and an ending that could possibly even change the way the entire film was seen when reflecting back on it afterwards. I also anticipated that the ending might divide opinions, which it did. I didn't provide clear answers to every question within the story. I offered suggestions instead, partly to invite the audience to interpret events for themselves, and partly because without the budget for some visuals, it allowed me to shift some of the imaginative work onto the viewer. I was a child when Ghostbusters 2 came out in the cinema in 1989, and as with most anticipated blockbuster film releases, all the well-known fast food burger chain restaurants had advertising and promotional campaigns on the go, all geared up around the film's release, especially in considering how much of a smash hit the brilliant and far superior first Ghostbusters film was in 1984. Burger chains rolled out all the usual antics such as burgers, milkshakes, and kids' meals, all named after Ghostbusters 2, and little toy figures of characters from the film included within their children's meals. As kids, my siblings and me were taken to one of these burger chains as a treat one day by our parents to buy these children's meals that included the Ghostbusters 2 promotional material, and something happened that would stay with me. The typical things like a balloon, a toy figure, and a few other small items were included in my kids' meal. But more importantly, there was a plastic cup. The plastic cup had the Ghostbusters logo on it, but other than that, it felt completely empty inside when shaking it. Being confused, I turned to my parents and asked them what this empty cup was all about that I couldn't get the lid off. They didn't have no clue, but just at that time, a member of staff happened to be walking past our table, so my parents asked him if he knew. Without breaking character, he rushed over to our table, enthusiastically saying, No, whatever you do, please do not, under any circumstances, open these cups inside of here. Now, even more confused by this, we all naturally asked him, well, why not? And still staying in character for us kids, he came in closer to the table and whispered very seriously to everyone, Because this is not just an empty cup. Trapped inside of this sealed cup is a ghost. And wherever you open this cup, you will then release that ghost, and we can't have that here in this restaurant. Well, that was it for us kids. We were sold hook, line and sinker. We were absolutely spellbound by this news and were now completely enthralled. Suddenly we treated this cup with the utmost respect to the point of being worried about even touching it. We literally could not think about or talk about anything else now. And we had so many burning questions that we needed immediate answers, such as what kind of ghost could possibly be trapped inside of it? Where had the ghost come from? How did they manage to trap it inside of this cup? We looked around the restaurant to see if anyone else had been brave enough to break the seals on their cups yet and open them up. How did this burger chain manage to find so many ghosts and then trap them inside so many cups to give away? Who on earth was going to have to deal with all these ghosts that are about to be released out into the world? Well, the Ghostbusters, of course. Who else could handle such a job? Because as Bill Murray had clearly stated in the first film, no job is too big, no fee is too big. I think you can see where I'm going here with this story to connect it with what I'm saying about sometimes letting people use the power of their own imaginations instead. The idea of what us kids thought was inside of the cup was far more effective on us than anything else we received inside that kids meal. Any actual scary looking toy figure or anything, even though we could hold, touch and see those other things instead. Our imaginations had completely run away with us over this cup and what could possibly be inside of it. So that's the approach I decided to take a little with my film and the story, to use the empty cup technique. Instead of providing concrete answers to everything, I offered suggestions, leaving room for interpretation. This was driven by two main reasons. First, to encourage, as I say, the viewer to build their own mental images, explore paths, add mystery and weigh up various alternatives themselves. Second, without the budget to attempt it on screen, it allowed me to offload some of the creative burden to the audience. Of course, I fully accept that not all viewers of the film would appreciate this approach, and many didn't. There is no denying that this style of filmmaking and attitude is not everyone's cup of tea. However, it's impossible to please everyone, and that was never my aim anyway. In much earlier drafts, I had written in reasons for various events in the film. I explained things, provided lengthy backstories, but none of it felt right. Everything seemed too forced, as if I were including it merely for the sake of it or because I thought others expected it to be there. Whenever I read it back, I constantly found myself thinking, bloody hell, how many other films have we seen go down that road before? Or how many more times are people really going to want to have to sit through that particular storyline? What I was writing, the explanations I was given, all felt too obvious, too cliched, and for lack of a better word, lazy. I did try and bear in mind some very common universal truths that I felt most viewers would be able to relate to in some way as part of the plot. Things such as routine, structure, monotony of the work home, conveyor belt lifestyle, the rat race, the people around us that we're forced to encounter, such as at work, loneliness and isolation, our own racing minds, being an outsider, the aspect and weight of time passing us all by, social conformity, and also mental health. In addition to those things being universal truths, I felt they would apply to most people. I also believed that these ideas were timeless to a degree, and they would not suddenly become out of date due to fads and changing trends in the future. And because of that, I hope that the film wouldn't become outdated, so to speak, when viewed by people much further down the line. I also really didn't want to rely on tons of dialogue or long monologues to have to explain everything, especially when working with non-actors. I've seen this done many times in low-budget films where the actors are made to reel off these ridiculously long speeches to cover every plot point, including glaring plot holes, and it can be quite painful to watch. As a result, I knew there would be relatively little talking in my film. This was something I had to embrace and just accept, that in many ways it would be quite a quiet film, so to speak. I would need to find a balance, perhaps even split the film into two parts and carefully choose where sparse dialogue should be added. Because of this, I actually thought it would be interesting to explore the idea of silence even further. Since the main character in the film doesn't really say much throughout the film, I wanted much of the story to be conveyed through what happens around him, visually or through the actions and words of other characters. I found this approach to be another interesting challenge for me as a filmmaker, trying to communicate ideas without relying on spoken words. I've always enjoyed the use of metaphors in films from a storytelling and visual perspective, but incorporating them effectively can be tricky. In my film, I approached it in a way that links the main character's cough that he has to a broader theme. It's not just an illness, it symbolizes how his life and the world around him are suffocating him. I knew this wasn't going to be a film for those with short attention spans, put it that way. I'm sure some would disagree, but I really did spend a lot of time considering how to make this film as entertaining as possible for the viewer to watch and listen to, given our production constraints. I already felt like I was asking a lot of the viewer by asking them to commit their time to watching this no-budget indie drama with unknown actors by an unknown director. So when I was writing the script, I wanted to be careful and mindful of that as well, and not get carried away with too many self-indulgent and unnecessarily things beyond what I was already trying, or to be pretentious or preachy about anything in particular, or have a false agenda of any kind, or to try and educate anyone in anything, and to also not make it a very long overall running time, which I kept to under 90 minutes. I found writing Electrician to be enjoyable, actually. It just seemed to pour out of me. I pretty much knew exactly what I wanted, and I was very clear on how I see it all based on what I felt we could pull off. That's not to say that there weren't moments while writing it that I didn't get stuck at certain times, because I did a lot. Plenty of times I went back and forth on things, and I would sit there just staring at the screen or off blankly into space. And if I had our family dog with me, a beautiful black lab called George, I would sit there and look at him for the answers, which he always refused to give me, even with food bribes. I actually dread to think the amount of rubbish that poor old George had to sit through and listen to me ramble on about during those times, and I do wonder how much of it he was just pretending to be asleep. Listening to music massively helps me when writing or trying to visualize something. There is something to be said about the right piece of music that can evoke the imagination, and if I was stuck on what to write, I would also listen to some music, usually while out on a long run, but music in a taste that I felt suited the vibe of the film or just a specific scene, and more often than not I would start to see it unfold in my mind's eye soon after. Having long breaks away from it also helped me when coming back and rereading the script and seeing what just doesn't work with fresh eyes. I tried to write as freely as possible, but I knew realistically that not everything I wrote would wind up getting filmed. When writing it, I also tried my best to format the script to look as professional as possible, but I never used any professional script writing software or get too hung up about that. Instead, I researched online and read up about how scripts should be presented when typing them up, such as the correct format, how the page should be laid out, which fonts to use, font size, using the correct explanation of things of what's going on, such as screen headers, subheaders, character introductions, the transitions, actions taking place, and all that. I also knew that one page of script usually equals around 1 minute of screen time. Electrician took the best part of a year to write, which included all of the rough drafts, rewrites, and making sense of all the countless notes I had over the years in several A4 notepads like some kind of mad scientist.